Hello, I'm Mariam Mashiri, and this is the Iran War Today, our daily briefing bringing you up to date with all you need to know on day 95 of the US-Israel war with Iran. Well, let's start with some of today's main developments now. America's top diplomat testifies before Congress and talks up the prospect of achieving a peace deal with Iran. Meanwhile, clashes continue in southern Lebanon despite Israel and Hezbollah accepting a US plan for a partial ceasefire. President Trump announces the agreement after a reportedly furious phone call with the Israeli Prime Minister, whom he apparently called crazy. The IRGC, Iran's most powerful fighting force, issues a new threat warning everything will be different if the US resumes fighting. The family of a British couple jailed in Iran on espionage charges say they've lost an appeal against their 10-year sentence. Lindsay and Craig Foreman are both on hunger strikes in Tehran. Let's start in the US, where America's top diplomat, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, has been testifying before Congress for the first time since the war with Iran began. Mr. Rubio covered a range of critical issues. He warned Iran to open the Strait of Hormuz, accused the regime of trying to build a shield for its nuclear program, and says he's confident that Iran's supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, is still alive. Well, President Trump has been posting about the war, writing on Truth Social that it's time, one way or another, for Iran to make a deal. You've been doing this for 47 years, he wrote, and it cannot be allowed to go on for any longer. Well, first, let's take a look at some of Marco Rubio's exchange with a Democratic senator on the importance of reopening the Strait of Hormuz.
If Iran wants to be able to move its oil again through the strait, they will have to reopen the straits. If they refuse to do so, then we have other options available to us, but we would prefer to negotiate the opening of this, which means
tell us about the negotiations. What do you need from them in order to get the strait reopened? We need the strait reopened tomorrow.
Well, what needs to happen is very simple. They need to announce that they will no longer fire on commercial ships that are going through or threaten to fire on ships, because in many cases, ships just won't move.
Well, let's cross live to Washington and speak to our White House reporter, Bern de Boosman. Bern, what have we learned from Marco Rubio's testimony this afternoon?
Well, I think the primary thing we learned is that he's still optimistic about the prospect of a negotiated end to this war, but only if Iran essentially agrees to the two red lines that the U.S. has set out, the opening of the Strait of Hormuz without any tolls and the commitment to discuss the future of its enrichment and nuclear program. It was also notable he kind of extended the timeline for talks. He said this might not necessarily happen soon or immediately, which is something that's been suggested by the president and other officials. He said there's logistical difficulties in negotiating with Iran through intermediaries, and then in the Iranians having to go back and discuss amongst themselves and disagree amongst themselves in some cases about what the next step forward is in the U.S. So he said essentially that the U.S. remains optimistic, but that the time frame might be a little longer than many Americans have been led to believe and have been hoping for.
OK, Bern, thank you very much. Well, let's turn now to Lebanon and the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah, which threatens to derail broader diplomatic efforts to end the war. Both sides agreed to a US ceasefire proposal, but overnight Hezbollah and the Israeli military continued to trade strikes. There are more high-stakes talks between Israel and Lebanon taking place, but the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu appears to be under growing pressure from the White House to scale back the military campaign. According to US media, President Trump held an expletive-ridden phone call with Netanyahu in which he reportedly called the Israeli PM crazy. Well, let's cross live now and speak to our correspondent, Wira Davis, who is in northern Israel. And Wira, does the fighting show any signs of slowing down? And how much do you think Ms. Netanyahu will take into account the increasing pressure from President Trump?
Well, look, on the fighting first, I spent most of the day up on Israel's northern border just behind me, a border that for every day for the past few weeks has been very dangerous and very kinetic, with lots of missiles and drones coming across, heavy Israeli military maneuvers. But for about 24 hours now, it has been unusually quiet, directly almost after that declaration from Donald Trump that a partial ceasefire has been agreed. Almost no ordnance has come over from Hezbollah into northern Israel since about 1:30 in the morning, and people have been able to move along that border with much greater freedom. The problem is that many of the people we've been speaking to don't expect that situation to last. And the reason for that is that while Israel has agreed not to attack Hezbollah positions in the Lebanese capital, Beirut, it has said, and it has continued to attack Hezbollah positions across southern Lebanon. So the fighting is continuing in southern Lebanon, and Hezbollah has made it clear that if that situation continues, then the resumption of fire across the border will probably resume as well. I think what many people in the region do realise and agree on now is that the war between Israel and Hezbollah is inextricably linked to the wider conflict between the US and Iran. And the Iranians have made it clear that any deal to end the fighting, end the conflict, find a deal between Iran and America also needs an end to the fighting between Israel and Hezbollah. So yes, in answer to your second question, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, even though he's made it clear that he would like to continue and even escalate the fighting against Hezbollah in Lebanon, he is coming under increasing pressure internationally, including from the White House, to scale down Israeli military operations in Lebanon.
Thank you. Well, let's focus now on the situation on the ground in Lebanon. Lebanon's health ministry says Israeli strikes yesterday near a hospital in the southern city of Tyre killed 4 people and wounded more than 100 others. Our correspondent John Sudworth has been to the scene of that strike and sent this report.
So this is the scene after an Israeli airstrike here. It shows that despite all of the talk of ceasefires and peace deals, it's pretty meaningless for the people living here in southern Lebanon. This strike was in very close proximity to this building here, the main hospital in the southern city of Tyre. Extensive damage to the exterior, windows blown in, damage to some of the wards, injuries reported to the staff and some of the patients. It shows just how dangerous things are for people still living here in the south, and it's also the latest example of the risks to healthcare facilities and healthcare workers amid Israel's escalating offensive. Everywhere you go in the city of Tyre, you see scenes like these. This is another medical facility. There are apartment buildings brought down, block after block. The damage and destruction is really quite extraordinary. Israel says, of course, that it is targeting Hezbollah infrastructure and Hezbollah fighters to stop them firing drones and rockets over its border. And we've heard the Israeli jets back up in the air again today in the surrounding districts. Whatever is going on with the wider discussions, the geopolitics, the talks between Washington and Israel, Washington and the Gulf states, and Washington and Iran, of course, whatever talk there is about fraying ceasefires and partial ceasefires, for the people here in southern Lebanon, there is a feeling that peace is very far away. Israel, of course, is vowing to expand its occupation of a large swathe of the south of this country and to continue with its intensive military campaign.
Let's focus now on the approach of the Iranian regime and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is Iran's most powerful fighting force, has issued a warning. They threatened the US that things will be different if they choose to resume the fighting and insist the country's armed forces are, quote, more prepared than ever. Well, these comments come as the fragile ceasefire between Iran and the US technically remains in place. Well, let's speak to BBC Persian's World Affairs correspondent Gia Gol. And Gia, what do you make of these latest threats from the regime, and what do we know about their grip of power inside Iran?
Well, Mariam, I think the Revolutionary Guards commanders and Iranian leaders in Tehran, the message, the talk, it seems to me, is aimed actually is a deterrence messaging aimed outward. They trying to deter U.S. and Israel attack Iran again. That's why they say if this time, if the war resumes, they will use a different method to respond. They have learned from the conflict in previous conflict, and also they have weapons never used before and escalate the war beyond the region. And also at the same time, they have opened a diplomatic channel. They have been talking to the U.S. via Pakistanis and Qataris at the same time. But I think Iranian regime is extremely worried about the situation inside the country. I think also this kind of threat has is a political messaging aimed inward, is domestically, because Iran is facing economic hardship, imminent war, sanctions, currency crisis, and also inflations. And the regime is deeply unpopular amongst large part of the society. I think the government is extremely worried about protests and uprising. That's why in the past few months, actually in the past month, particularly few weeks and past month, the judiciary system has been handing down heavy sentences. Just yesterday, a man, because of posting a video of January protest online, convicted to 10 years in prison. And scores of young protesters have been convicted to death. Almost in the past month, we are hearing from Iran that on daily basis, they are executing protesters and those opposition who are accused of spying for Israel or United States of America. I think all are the sign of the government extremely is worried. At this point of time, they are not worried about popularity amongst their population. It's more about uniting the security forces to keep the regime intact. I think also you mentioned, Mariam, just a few minutes ago about British couple have been, their appeal have been rejected. They are on hunger strike at this point of time. Craig and Lindsay Foreman, both they were arrested in January last year. And in February, they were convicted to 10 years in prison for spying. Of course, charges they strongly denied. And I think their appeal have been rejected. Also, rejecting their appeal possibly could be a defiant message from Tehran that we do not bow to international or foreign pressure. Also, it has a domestic message, in my opinion, because in the past, whenever there is a problem in the country, the leadership in Tehran trying to use foreign confrontation to project power inside the country.
Gia, thank you. Well, whether you're joining us on YouTube, TikTok, Sounds, radio or TV, thanks for your time. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the Iran War Today.